What if I told you that some of the most documented, most witnessed, most extraordinary miracles in human history happened on African soil? What if I told you those records exist, that they were collected, cataloged, and reviewed by the most powerful religious institution in the world, and that those same records are sealed? Not lost, not destroyed, but sealed. Welcome back. If you're new here, I'm glad you found this video, because what we're about to go into today is the kind of conversation that most people are not having. And I think a part of you already knows why. Because somewhere deep inside, you already feel it. But there is something powerful, something ancient, something extraordinarily real about the spiritual energy that has pulsed through the African continent for thousands of years. Today we're not just going to talk about conspiracy theories. We're going to talk about history. We're going to talk about consciousness, and we're going to talk about what it means for you right now in your daily practice of manifestation and spiritual alignment. Let's get into it. First, let's establish some foundation, because context is everything. The Vatican Apostolic Archive, previously known for centuries as the Vatican Secret Archives, contains approximately 85 kilometers of shelving, 85 kilometers of documents, records, letters, papal decrees, trial transcripts, and yes, miracle reports. Now, to be clear, the word secret in its original Latin usage didn't mean hidden. It meant private, personal, set apart. But over time, as access restrictions grew, certain collections within those archives became genuinely difficult for outside researchers to access. In 2019, Pope Francis officially renamed the archive to the Vatican Apostolic Archive, in part to clarify that it is not a vault of dark secrets, and many scholars do have access to large portions of it. But, and this is the part people miss, not all of it. There are collections that require special Vatican approval to access. There are records that have not yet been fully digitized. There are files from specific geographic and cultural regions that have been, let's say, slowly processed. Africa falls into that category. The Catholic Church has had a presence in Africa for nearly 2,000 years. Yes, 2,000. Christianity arrived in North Africa before it was widespread in Europe. The Egyptian Coptic Church traces its roots directly to the Apostle Mark. The Ethiopian Orthodox tradition is one of the oldest Christian traditions on earth. And yet, when we look at the Church's formal canonization records, when we look at officially recognized saints, when we look at miracles that have received full Vatican theological investigation and approval, the African continent is dramatically underrepresented. As of recent years, out of nearly 900 official saints recognized by the Vatican, fewer than 70 are African, and the vast majority of those were canonized only in the last few decades. Many of them martyrs from Uganda in the late 1800s. But here's the thing, the number of reported miracles, visions, healings, and supernatural events documented from African communities, both by local clergy and by visiting missionaries, runs into the thousands. So, what happened to all of that? To understand why African miracle records might be classified or inaccessible, you first need to understand how the Vatican's canonization process works, because it is deeply tied to documentation. When the Church investigates a potential saint, they open what's called a cause. That cause requires eyewitness testimony, medical documentation of healings, theological review, and often decades or even centuries of investigation. For a miracle to be recognized, it must be verified as scientifically inexplicable by medical experts and theologically sound by church theologians. This is where it gets interesting. Many of the miracle reports come in from African communities throughout the colonial period, and even into the 20th century were recorded by local clergy, African priests, African bishops, African deacons, who were operating within the church but had far less institutional power than their European counterparts. Their reports went into the system, but the investigation process, expensive, slow, and highly centralized in Rome, often simply never began. The paperwork sits, the records exist, but they are functionally classified, not because someone gave an order to hide them, but because the institutional gravity of a Eurocentric church never prioritized moving them forward. Now let me be specific, because vague claims help no one. Let's talk about some of the cases that have been referenced by historians, theologians, and researchers studying this intersection. First, the healings associated with early African mystics and prophets in the DRC, Nigeria, and Ethiopia from the 1920s through the 1960s. This was a period of massive religious transformation across the continent, a time when indigenous African Christianity was exploding with energy, vision, and extraordinary reports of healing and prophecy. Figures like Simeon Kimbangu in the Congo, who attracted hundreds of thousands of followers and whose followers reported dramatic healings, were watched closely by the colonial Catholic Church. Kimbangu himself was imprisoned for life by Belgian colonial authorities with church acquiescence. His legacy is now enormous. His church has millions of members. The documentation of what he reportedly did, partially archived, minimally investigated. Second, the apparitions. There have been dozens of reported Marian apparitions on the African continent, visions of the Virgin Mary reported by communities with multiple witnesses in places like Rwanda, Uganda, Nigeria, Cameroon. Kibeho, Rwanda, is perhaps the most widely known, the only Vatican-approved Marian apparition site in Africa, but Kiabu only received that approval in 2001. And there are other sites whose reports are still pending, or effectively dormant in the Vatican system. Third, the documented healings within the African Catholic charismatic movement, particularly those from the 1970s onward. The charismatic renewal swept through African Catholicism and brought with it an enormous number of documented healing testimonies. These were passed through local dioceses to Rome. Many researchers who have looked into this have found that while the documents were received, formal investigation processes were rarely open. I want to be honest with you because this topic deserves intellectual honesty. When we say these records are classified, we're not necessarily talking about men in robes hiding files in secret underground chambers. The reality is both simpler and more troubling than that. It means that within a bureaucratic, centralized institution like the Vatican's, records from African dioceses have historically moved through the system more slowly. It means that the resources devoted to investigating African causes have been proportionately smaller. It means that certain collections within the Vatican Apostolic Archive are not yet open to general scholarly access. And it means that in recent years, as African Catholicism has grown to represent some of the most vibrant, fast-growing Catholic communities in the world, pressure has been building on Rome to revisit, re-examine, and reclassify some of what's been sitting in those archives. There are Vatican insiders who have quietly noted that the African Miracle Archive backlog is significant. There are African theologians and bishops who have actively lobbied for more resources to be dedicated to African causes. And there are researchers, some of whom who have published in academic theological journals, who have raised exactly this question. What are we not seeing, and why? Now I want to bring this home, because this isn't just a history lesson. This is about you. This is about your consciousness, your practice, and what you allow yourself to believe is possible. Here's the thing that I keep coming back to when I think about this topic. The miracle is not the anomaly. The miracle is a reminder. Every documented healing, every vision, every inexplicable transformation reported across the African continent, and reported everywhere else too, is functioning as a piece of evidence that human consciousness, when aligned, when surrendered, when vibrating at a frequency that transcends ordinary fear-based reality, can interface with forces that our current scientific language cannot fully describe. And Africa has always known this. Long before European Christianity arrived on the continent, African spiritual traditions, from the Yoruba cosmology to the Kemetic mystery schools to the Sand people's trance traditions, had already developed sophisticated frameworks for understanding how human beings can access states of consciousness that open doorways to what we might call miracles. What happens when those frameworks get suppressed? What happens when the institutional systems of power, whether colonial governments or religious institutions, or even our own internalized skepticism, decide that certain kinds of knowledge are not valid? They get filed away. They get classified. They stop moving through the system. And this is exactly what happens in our own minds. Think about it. How many times have you had an experience, a synchronicity, a gut feeling that turned out to be exactly right, a moment where you set an intention and watched it materialize in ways that seemed too precise to be a coincidence, and then immediately talk yourself out of it? That was just luck. I was probably just seeing patterns. That's not how things work. That is the internalized Vatican. That is a part of your mind that has been trained by school, by culture, by fear, to classify your own miracle records, to file them away, to never open up the investigation. But here's what I need you to understand. The investigation was never closed. The records never disappeared. They are sitting inside you, waiting. What is manifestation at its core? It is a practice of deliberately reopening your own classified files. It is the practice of saying, I am not going to allow institutional doubt, internal or external, to keep my highest capacity sealed. When you set an intention, when you speak an affirmation, when you visualize with emotional intensity, and then release with faith, you are doing what every healer, every prophet, every mystic throughout human history has done. You are submitting your cause. You are requesting an investigation. You are saying to the universe, I believe this is real. I believe this is possible. I am asking for a review. And the universe, like a well-run archive that never actually loses anything, pulls the file. The healings in Africa happened. The visions were real to those who experienced them. The transformations were documented. Whether or not an institution chose to process that documentation does not change what occurred in those bodies, in those communities, in that consciousness. Your manifestations are real. Your intentions carry power. Whether or not your rational mind chooses to process that documentation does not change what is available to you. Here's what I want to leave with you today. The story of African miracle records and the Vatican is not just a story about religion or history or institutional power. It is a story about what happens when extraordinary human experience is filtered through systems that were not built to honor it. And we are all living inside some version of that system. In our culture, in our education, in our own internalized beliefs about what is possible for us. The practice of manifestation, real, disciplined, embodied manifestation, is the practice of refusing to let those systems have the final word. Africa didn't lose its miracles. They are still there, still documented, still alive in the traditions, in the communities, in the land itself, waiting for the investigation to be reopened. And you haven't lost yours either. If today's video resonated with you, if something in here unlocked something in you, I want to hear about it. Drop a comment below, tell me what opened up, tell me what you're ready to stop classifying. And if you're at a place in your journey where you want direct, personalized support, where you want to work through your specific blocks, your specific beliefs, your specific manifestation practice, with someone who's going to hold that space with full intention and presence, I offer one-on-one manifestation affirmation sessions. The link is in the description. These are not generic coaching calls. These are targeted, deep dive sessions built around your energy, your goals, and your specific patterns. Come prepared to go somewhere real. If you're new here, please subscribe, because this is the kind of content I come back with every week. We go deep here, we go honest, we go into the territory that most people walk past. I'll see you in the next one.